Thanks, Eric. We've talked a little bit this morning about some of the challenges related to the TSMO workforce pipeline, whether that's organizational challenges or awareness issues. But one of the crucial questions that we're struggling with is where do we really find the talent that we need? Next slide. So in terms of some of the traditional sources, we've heard this morning also about engineering, civil engineering and planning students from universities. That's probably been the most dominant place that DOT professionals have been recruited. And then within community college or technical schools, we have a variety of programs that develop skill sets and knowledge that are supportive of TSMO functions as well, such as computer information, computer engineering, electrical and electronics technology, even commercial driving programs. Next slide. As far as the incumbent workers go, veterans have certainly been a source for the TSMO community, particularly given the fact that in military occupations, the bulk of these are focused on transportation, logistics, or technology, which all, of course, are crucial when thinking about TSMO workforce. Emergency management professionals certainly have skill sets related to incident management, communication structures, and other skills that are transferable to TSMO, as well as being able to adapt to that fast pace and often rather stressful work environment they may encounter. We also see recruitment happening from construction industry or the IT industry, where again, we have some similar skill sets that are translational to the TSMO space. Next slide. So the issue with sticking with just our traditional talent pools are that we're not diversifying the talent pipeline in order to address the changing landscape of TSMO and the evolving skills and competencies that are required to be successful in that arena. And given that also, we struggle in terms of making sure that students in some of these programs are aware of TSMO, and that's certainly the case when we start thinking about diversifying. And so that's going to become an even more important aspect of our work as an industry, is making sure that TSMO's story and the TSMO career path opportunities are recognizable and visible for students. So some additional sources of TSMO workers that agencies are starting to explore include expanding academic pipelines. And in this case, you run into challenges in some situations where agencies have been restricted as to the types of disciplines they can recruit from. So looking at ways to address that is going to be critical. Majors such as computer science and data science and other engineering disciplines besides civil engineering, as well as other programs within technical and community college systems that can then translate to TSMO. There are strategic partnerships that will need to be built, particularly when we think about some of these new ways of recruiting and these new potential sources of students. And tapping neurodiverse talent is another thing that I think really holds a lot of promise for the industry. And we're starting to see DOTs that are developing partnerships with universities or community colleges where they serve neurodiverse students, and it becomes a training program on both sides of the spectrum. So it's the educational institution that's helping to orient the DOT to the needs and accommodations that will be required for one of the students to be successful within that organization. But then it's also helping the educational institutions understand the kinds of skill sets that are really necessary and maybe supportive of their work. And so I think this is one of the areas where we're going to see more and more movement in the coming years, particularly given the fact that neurodiverse individuals also are coming at problems from very different perspectives, and they have, in many cases, extreme talent in certain areas that may be harnessed to address TSMO challenges. Cross-training existing staff is another really crucial way that we can address TSMO workforce. And so thinking about how to make sure that we're eliminating those silos like Commissioner Sheehan discussed this morning, so that across the agency, everyone is aware of the importance of TSMO within the larger picture of the transportation agenda. And so making sure that there are staff from all areas of the organization that recognize potential for either advancement or career change, so that we're able to, in many cases, stop some of the loss that we have from other disciplines. And then encore careers, another great way to attract new talent to TSMO. And so, as we begin looking at areas where we have talent that may be transferable, keep in mind that, it's not just the public sector transportation arena where we need to recruit from. So looking also into the freight industry as well, where we have many similar roles and similar individuals that can bring that expertise over into some of these areas. Next slide. And so then in thinking about the barriers to increasing awareness about TSMO, I think probably the number one issue is visibility. And we see this with our students at the university. I'm at the University of Memphis. I teach transportation engineering courses within our civil engineering program. And one of the things that really is an issue is that students don't get exposed to transportation in general, typically until about the junior year. And in most programs across the country, even within civil engineering, there's only one required transportation class. So by the time students get to that point, many of them have already opted into other subspecialties like structures or geotechnical, where they may have had exposure to that disciplinary element earlier. And so when we recognize that we're only exposing students that are in our traditional pipelines, later in their academic career and then very minimally, you realize what kind of challenge we're facing in terms of visibility across all of these other disciplines that we've been discussing that are not our usual suspects, so to speak. So there is going to need to be a lot of work focused on how to elevate that awareness of TSMO and its connections to other disciplines. Hiring practices, I mentioned earlier the fact that, in many cases, organizations struggle with the fact that they may have limited numbers of, or limited types of disciplines that they're allowed to recruit from. And so addressing those issues is important. But then also making sure that we're recognizing areas where we have outdated position descriptions and other internal hiring practices that might be limiting our ability to recruit. And then, of course, the organizational silos. So back to Commissioner Sheehan's comments earlier this morning, it's essential to really break those barriers and make sure that across the organization, TSMO is something that everyone understands. So some of the best practices that we need to start thinking about in terms of building the TSMO pipeline, starting very early, definitely in high school, but even earlier than that. And there are programs all around the country where people are starting to do this. You'll see this image over on the right. This is actually from a school here in Memphis. This is the Transportation STEM Academy. It's a high school focused on STEM, but with a transportation flavor to it. And so, that's one example that is obviously very targeted, but this can happen across the board in programs all around the country through career and technical education. And so there's an opportunity to really be much more intentional about how we integrate transportation topics and make sure that students are aware of career opportunities. We're going to need to expand industry and academic partnerships. I think more than ever, this is going to be absolutely essential moving forward. So making sure that faculty in institutions, whether they are 2-year or 4-year or technical programs, are really aware of the industry needs and the skill set requirements, and particularly because this is going to be changing so rapidly all the time, it's really essential that we have those partnerships to make sure that we are maintaining our programs so that they are responsive to industry needs, and also getting that exposure for students to those industry partners. That's another way to really help build that pipeline. Casting a much wider net, like we mentioned before, there are lots of different places that we can be recruiting and drawing students and incumbent workers into our organizations, providing exceptional learning experiences. I think the Transportation Technology Tournament that Adam mentioned earlier is one of these. I know that my students were participants in this year, and it absolutely changed their perspective about transportation careers, and multiple students from that class that participated specifically went after TSMO related career opportunities as a result of that. Next slide. So other ways to start thinking about the pipeline opportunities, pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs. These are great ways to help students or unemployed individuals start to build skills and start to really understand what some of these careers can entail, whether they are at the professional or paraprofessional level. And then elevating the awareness of TSMO. I think I mentioned earlier that I think this is probably one of the most critical things that we have to do. And it's really telling the story of transportation as a whole and understanding why transportation is so critical to our communities and to all of the citizens that it serves. And so elevating this awareness and helping people, not just students, also parents, and again, then also unemployed individuals, understand how to connect into these career opportunities is important. Recruiting from within an organization, this can help not only with filling gaps that you have, but also in retaining more staff from the DOT by allowing them to move into a different area that might be a better fit for their interest or their career aspirations. And then creating a culture of innovation. So TSMO, I think, more than any place within an organization, is going to be where you are constantly adopting new strategies, new technologies, having to push things to the edge and think outside the box. And so in order to do that, it's incredibly important that the organization itself is set up for supporting that culture and growing talent within the organization and allowing them to explore and recognize opportunities for innovation. And so with that, I think we are back to Eric.